Hello, thank you very much for the kind introduction. My name's Tony Edwards. I'm the CEO of Stepchange Global. It's my great pleasure to be here presenting at the MENA Energy Meet. We've heard a lot about technology already this morning, and what I want to do is make the case for change and show that just acquiring the latest digital technologies really isn't enough to maximize the value in your frontline operations. And that actual fact that people, process and organizational change is absolutely critical to embedding these advanced technologies in your frontline operations. First of all, a little bit about Stepchange Global and who we are. We're an independent digital transformation and integrated operations advisory and consultancy company. We advise on how you use technology and data and information in your frontline. Actually, we're not too concerned about how it gets there, as long as it gets there and is easy to use. So we are independent of technology suppliers, so we can advise you on the technologies you need from an independent point of view, rather than having a lot of technology companies coming to you and trying to sell all their different versions of advanced digital technologies. The thing we're most interested in is how you organize yourselves around having this data and information, and how you take the data and information, and that reflects into new organizational models and structures. The other thing I'd like to point out on this slide is I'm going to be talking a little bit about a benchmarking approach that we've developed over the last 18 months, and how we've now got a database where you can show where we can compare where your operations are on digital enablement and remote operations. So how have we landed on the fact that change is critically important to your digital transformation strategy? Well, that's because we've been fortunate enough to work with many of the best and most innovative companies in this area over the last 12 years. Companies like Equinor and BP, Total, more recently companies like Repsol. But we've also been fortunate in really to be working in some of the digital hotspots. And I'd just like to point out, Australia is a really prime digital hotspot in terms of what's going on there with the companies like Santos, Origin Energy, Beach Energy, Woodside, Chevron and DBHP in the mining sector. And, if you want to go and see a lot of these technologies coming to place into a single asset, that's where we would strongly advise you to go. We also have a huge amount of practical experience of implementing collaborative work environments, and this is where all these advanced technologies come together, and it's where you make the decisions and implement those decisions so that you actually get a different outcome in your operations. And without this, we see that a lot of people are spending a lot of money on data and information which is frankly not used. And typically when we go into an organization, an operating company, this is typically what we see. But here you can see a selection of the collaborative environments and integrated operations centers that we've worked on. And I'd just like to draw your attention to some of the ones in the mining sector, which are down in the bottom left-hand corner. Some of the largest mines in the world are now being remotely controlled from city center locations. Huge operations, 16,000 people in the field, 39 control desks. And again, we would see that certainly South America and Australia are a hotspot for digital transformation in the in the mining sector. And it's a place where oil and gas can go to learn. So on to today's talk, digital transformation, or should it be digitally enabled organizational transformation? So the first real question is, what is digital transformation in oil and gas? And what we see is that there's a long shopping list of new technologies, including comms, cloud, digital twin, IoT, mobile worker, real-time analysis, data analytics, robotics, automation, and the list goes on and on and on. And really it's how is it that we apply to our day-to-day operations? How do we improve production? How do we improve our operations, our maintenance, our machinery monitoring, our drilling activities? How do we, improve our environmental monitoring? And so it's really, how do we apply this list of technologies here on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, to everything that we do in our current operations, be that onshore, offshore, oil and gas, unconventional, or whatever. But when you start looking at an operation that has already gone down this path, actually what you see is a change in the way you work. And fundamentally, we believe that this is these technologies are about changing the way you work. And what do you see if you go into an office, say a support office, or into the field, which is of an operation that's already digitally enabled? Well, you see a number of things. One, you see the organization is moving to a real-time or near real-time way of working, or agile working in the latest jargon. We see that there's connection of one or more remote sites and teams working together. So work is now not geographically isolated. We see that work is moving towards multidisciplinary way of working. So it's not some functional models anymore. It's about delivering production from your reservoir to your customer. It's about, the entire well development and not just the drilling. We see that there's a strong element of value chain integration optimization. And we see that particularly in the Middle East countries and in mining and in other hotspots like Australia. And we see that this is changing the whole way the organization makes decisions from reactive to proactive. What we see here, definitions. I mean, there's a lot of definitions out there. I think we suffer from the fact that there is no one standard definition. There's a huge amount of jargon out there, from old terms like digital oil field, through digitalization, through digital transformation, integrated operations, which is common in Norway in some organizations, and certainly in mining. And we see that, of the definitions, many of the definitions focus on the technology, but many of them also mention, updating processes and updating organizational models. And I think, those of us who've been doing this for 10, 15 years recognize the fact that, unless you change your organization and update your organizational models to take advantage of these technologies, really you can't maximize the value. And we have an equation that we often use called NT plus OO equals EOO. So new technology plus old organization equals expensive old organization. So really just bolting these new technologies onto your current organization is not going to maximize your value. So what are the drivers and what are the enablers? There's a whole bunch of drivers for going down this route, performance improvement, the discovery in remote locations, the technical nature of discoveries, etc. And there's a bunch of enablers in terms of all of the technologies that we see out there: analytical methods, modeling methods, digital twin, etc., etc. But we also see that the enablers are these new models which are emerging. Supply chain models, operational models, and organizational models. And if you look at other sectors, and the one we look at is often defense, they will say things like the first wave of digital transformation was technology enabled, the second wave was organizationally enabled. And I think, the problem we see with a lot of operators is that they get stuck and fixated on the technology enablement piece. This is a slide that we often use to explain this. If you collect data, transmit data, you need to store data, then you need to visualize it, then you need to do a bunch of analysis. And of course, the collection of data and transmission of data and the storage, the cost for doing this has dropped phenomenally over the last 10 years with IIoT, high bandwidth comms, and of course, cloud technologies coming through. The visualization, there's still a lot of work going on in that area. And of course, we're seeing the analysis in terms of analytics, machine learning, model-based systems coming through very, very strongly. But at the end of the day, if you collect the data, transmit it, store it, visualize it, and do some analysis to understand an opportunity, you've still actually got to implement this. And this is where the people come into this thing. And somebody's got to take a decision and implement that decision in your operations if you're going to get any value at all. And if you unwrap this in terms of a technology stack, you get data capture and storage, you get communications infrastructure, visualization, analysis. But at the end of the day, you've got to actually take that data and information and implement it into a work process. And then you've got to collaborate around that work process. And then you've got to have an organization that can deliver that process. You've got to have the organization and governance to be able to make and take a decision. You need the change, leadership, and training, decision and action before you get value. And what we see is this broadly breaks down into a technology bucket, a process bucket, an organizational change bucket, and a people change bucket. And we see that nearly all of the effort is in these bottom two areas. And this is what we call a capability delivery approach. So what is the process you want to improve? What is the technology that's going to improve it? Data and information, high quality, more timely data, etc., etc. How does that process get updated to make the most of those technologies? But then, most importantly, what are the skills, competencies, behaviors needed to execute the process? And what are the organizational structures, incentives, and relationships needed to execute that process? And without those latter two, it's very, very difficult to maximize the value of what you do. The issue is, not only have we got one stack, we've got multiple stacks across our value chain. We often see a lot of people integrating on the vertical side. So how do you take that data and information? How do you make decisions? And how do you do that around a certain functional discipline, such as well monitoring or rotating equipment or pipeline modeling? But actually, it's very important to think about the horizontal integration. And this horizontal integration is more difficult to do, because you're crossing functional silos, you're crossing organizational silos, and actually you're looking at very, very diverse data sets from one end to the other that come from very different systems historically. Now, one of the things that we've done is we've developed a remote operations and digital enablement benchmarking system. We've got 50 operational assets on that and 15 projects of all types, including assets from 3 super majors and 6 other operators. And we can grade where you are on 6 themes that we've developed. And what we typically see when we do this analysis is a picture like this. So the 6 themes that we look at are vision, including value; digital technology, which we would call the digital basics; project processes, if you're on a major project; how do you update your operational processes; what are your org structure and operating models; how much are you focusing on change; and then of course there's the next wave of technologies, which are the advanced technologies. And typically what you see is this orange line, where people are focusing on the digital basics and they're focusing on the advanced technology, but the whole piece around change and organizational structure is relatively undeveloped compared to the technology pieces. We also see that for an industry average, you'd be on this green line, but for a best-in-class asset or operation, it's much more evenly developed, and there's much more focus on the organizational structures and operating models. And indeed, we're now seeing very large companies begin to develop agile operating models and organizational models, which are specifically designed to make the most of that digital technology. And we're heavily involved in a number of those projects at the moment. So, technology is not just a technology transformation. And what we see here is everybody focuses on cloud, big data, Internet of Things, AI, all of these things. And yet there's all this stuff in the iceberg, which is underneath, which is your operating model, change management, governance, how you run your business. And actually, this is the most important thing. Now, the technology is probably 80% of your spend, and the change management is probably 20% of your spend. But the amount of effort that you need to actually embed this in your organization is really quite significant. And if you're not spending 20% of your budget on change, then you're probably not doing enough. And certainly in the early days of digital oil field, we learned this. We then see that there has been rollback, and sustainability has been a problem for many of the operators who were in the first wave of digital implementation. So, how does a change in way of working happen? Well, this is typically what we see. We see that organizations move from, being serial processes to parallel or agile processes. We see that, we're moving away from single discipline functional organization to multidisciplinary process delivery based teams. We're seeing work being independent of physical location. Of course, the COVID pandemic has really accelerated that massively. We see that decisions are now being based on data and not just on experience. And we see organizations becoming more proactive and less reactive. Some conclusions are, digital transformation and digitalization or digitally enabled organizational transformation. I think those are at the forefront of this, and those that really get it recognize that this is truly organizational transformation. The technologies are great. They enable us to do a huge amount of things, but on their own, they won't maximize the value. It's not an IT or a technology project. It's an organizational change project. You need to integrate people, process, technology, and organization and governance if you're going to maximize the value. We would say that just because you've got the technologies doesn't mean that you're getting the value. You need to integrate both vertically from sensor through to decision making and horizontally along your value chain if you want to maximize the value. And you know, typical digital transformation programs focus heavily on technology and kind of forget about the change piece. You know, if change is not 20% of your budget, you're probably not spending enough. You know, change readiness is essential, especially for asset operations, because they're going to get more and more technologies coming over the horizon. And just one thing on leadership, you know, leadership is absolutely critical and needs to be active. And I would say it's leadership from your operational assets as well, and your asset management, not just your technology organization, which is key. Finally, I'd just like to acknowledge the digital energy technical section in the SPE. They've been very active recently, and we've jointly written a paper on change management, which is the accumulated, you know, last 10 years, 10, 12 years of experience of these people here. You can see, led by Jim Crompton from the Colorado School of Mines, on the importance of change management. And I'd highly recommend that anybody who's interested in recognizing change is so important, you know, look at this paper, or if you're interested, come and talk to us. I haven't talked a lot about how you do the change. I'm just talking today about the importance and the need of change. So at that point, I'm very happy to take any questions.